The sun hadn't yet climbed above the ridge when Marigold Whitaker slipped through the broken fence behind Ruth's Highway Diner. The gravel crunched softly beneath her worn sneakers, but she knew how to walk light. She'd been practicing for a long time now, 2 years give or take, since the morning she woke up and her mother didn't. The sky over Cedar Hollow was the color of old tin gray and pale with just a thin line of pink where the Montana mountains met the dawn. The air smelled like bacon grease and pine trees in the cold dirt of late summer. Somewhere a truck rumbled on Interstate 90, the sound rolling across the valley like distant thunder. Marigold was 5 years old. She stood just over 3 feet tall, and her jeans were rolled 3 times at the cuff because they'd once belonged to a boy twice her age. Her hair hung in pale, tangled waves around a small, heart-shaped face, and her eyes, wide and brown and watchful, took in everything. She didn't miss much. She couldn't afford to. She carried a plastic horse in her pocket. Its name was Buttercup. The paint had worn off the mane, and one of its legs had a tiny crack where she dropped it on a parking lot the previous winter. Her mother had given it to her on her 3rd birthday, wrapped in a paper napkin with a little ribbon made from a shoelace. It was the last gift she'd ever gotten from anyone who loved her. Marigold reached the dumpster behind the diner and stopped. She listened. Inside the building, the morning cooks hadn't arrived yet, but they would soon. Ruth, the woman who owned the place, always came in around 5:30, and the first breakfast orders started hitting the grill by 6. Marigold had maybe 20 minutes, long enough to find something if she was lucky, not long enough to get caught. She set her small hands against the metal side of the dumpster. It was cold. She took a breath and pushed up onto her tiptoes, reaching for the heavy plastic lid. It lifted only an inch before gravity fought her back. She tried again, straining her thin arms, trembling. A 3rd time. The lid gave way just enough for her to wedge a milk crate underneath and climb up onto it. Inside, the smell hit her first. Sour milk and old coffee grounds, and something sweet that had gone wrong. She didn't flinch. She trained herself not to flinch. Her hand closed around something wrapped in wax paper, a sandwich half-eaten. The bread was hard at the edges, but the middle looked fine. She tucked it into the front pocket of her faded pink hoodie. Further down, she found an apple with a single brown spot, a piece of bacon no bigger than her thumb, a napkin only slightly stained, which she folded carefully and put in her back pocket. Napkins were important. They could wipe things clean or wrap around Buttercup at night to keep her warm. From inside the diner came the sound of a door opening, then the clatter of a coffee pot being set down hard on a burner. Ruth had arrived. Marigold hopped down off the crate as quiet as a rabbit. She moved fast along the back wall of the building, staying low until she slipped behind a stack of old wooden produce crates that leaned against the side of the shed. This was her place, her hideout. From here, she could see the back parking lot, the dumpster, and the tree line where the weeds grew tall enough to disappear into. She sat cross-legged on the dirt and pulled a sandwich from her pocket. She ate it slowly. Her mother had taught her that. Slow bites make the food last longer and sit better in your stomach. Her mother had said a lot of things like that, little lessons tucked between cigarettes and long silences. Marigold remembered them all. She was halfway through the apple when she heard the back door of the diner open again. She froze. Through a narrow gap in the crate, she watched Ruth step out onto the concrete step. The older woman stood there for a moment, her gray hair pulled back in a loose bun, her apron already dusted with flour. Ruth lit a cigarette with hands that didn't shake, but didn't quite rest either. She smoked, looking out across the lot slowly like she was looking for something she'd lost a long time ago. Then Ruth's eyes drifted toward the crates, toward Marigold's hiding spot. Marigold held her breath. She didn't move. She had learned long ago that being still was the same as being invisible. Ruth's gaze lingered, longer than it should have. There was no anger in her face, no curiosity. Something else, something softer, something that looked almost like grief. Then Ruth turned, stubbed out her cigarette in the coffee can by the door, and went back inside. Marigold let out a long, quiet breath. She didn't know what had just happened, but a small feeling moved through her, something she couldn't name, warm and strange, like the memory of a blanket she'd forgotten. She finished her apple. The day wore on the way it always did. Marigold moved like a shadow through the edges of the world. She drifted down to the creek behind the laundromat and washed her face in the cold water. She found two empty soda cans near the gas station and put them in the small canvas bag she kept hidden under a pile of rocks behind the oak tree. 5 cents each if she brought them to the recycling place on Tuesday. That was her math. That was her week. She watched the traffic on the highway. She watched the truckers eating breakfast through the diner windows. She watched a family unload their station wagon at the motel across the street, a mother and a father and two little boys. And when the smallest boy laughed at something his father said, Marigold felt something small and sharp move inside her chest, and she looked away. By late morning, the sun had climbed high and the heat had settled into the valley like a heavy coat. Marigold crawled into the shade beneath the oak tree where the grass was still cool. She pulled Buttercup from her pocket and set the little horse on a flat stone in front of her. She wrapped the napkin around Buttercup's back like a saddle blanket. Then she lay on her stomach in the dirt and watched the world. That was when she saw the car. It was parked at the far end of the lot in the place where the gravel thinned out and the weeds took over. A black Cadillac, long and heavy with dust on the windshield, and a bumper that had been dented and never fixed. Marigold had never seen it before. She was sure of that. She knew every car that came to Ruth's Diner. She knew the blue truck that belonged to the early shift cook. She knew the red Buick that the old man named Walter drove in every Saturday. She knew strangers when she saw them. This car was a stranger. She watched it for a long time. Nobody came for it. Nobody went near it. The sun moved across the sky, and the shadow of the Cadillac crawled slowly across the gravel like something sleeping. By the time evening came, Marigold had almost forgotten about it. She scavenged what she could from the dinner rush. A handful of cold French fries in a paper boat. A styrofoam cup with half an inch of chocolate milkshake at the bottom. She ran her finger through the melted cream and licked it clean, closing her eyes at the sweetness. When the last customer left and the lights dimmed inside the diner, Marigold made her way to her sleeping spot behind the crates. She wrapped herself in the thin blanket she kept folded under a tarp. She curled up on her side with Buttercup pressed against her cheek. She fell asleep to the sound of the highway. The second day began like all the others. Marigold woke before the sun and scavenged before the kitchen staff arrived. She found half a biscuit and a corner of sausage in a juice box someone had only sipped from once. She ate behind the crates and watched the light come up over the mountains. But something was different today. She could feel it. A small, tight feeling at the base of her neck. The kind of feeling her mother used to call a shiver without a reason. Marigold's eyes kept drifting toward the Cadillac. It was still there, parked in exactly the same place. Dusty now as if it had been there a week instead of a day. After the breakfast rush, when the sun was high and the parking lot had gone quiet for the midday lull, Marigold crept out from behind the crates. She moved low to the ground the way she always did, weaving between parked cars and trash bins. She wasn't going near the Cadillac, she told herself that. She was just getting closer, just to look. She stopped about 20 feet away. The Cadillac sat low on its tires as if something inside it was heavier than it should have been. The windows were rolled up tight and the dust on them was streaked in places as if someone had pressed against the glass from the inside and then pulled away. Marigold took one step closer, then another, and then she heard it. A sound so small she thought at first it was the wind, 3 soft knocks, barely louder than a heartbeat, coming from the trunk. She froze. The sound came again. Knock, 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 weak, deliberate. Someone was inside. Marigold's breath caught in her throat. She looked around wildly. The lot was empty. Nobody at the back door of the diner, nobody on the road, just her and the black car, and that small, terrible sound. Her brother Jessup's voice came to her clear, as if he were standing beside her. "Don't stick your nose where it don't belong, Goldie." That's what he told her 100 times. That's what he said every time he left her alone in their one-room rental at the edge of town, every time he disappeared for a night or a day or a week. But Jessup wasn't here, and whoever was in that trunk was still knocking. Marigold took a step closer. Her legs felt like water. She put her small hand flat against the hot metal of the trunk. The sun had been beating on it all morning, and it nearly burned her palm, but she didn't pull away. "Hello," she whispered. Her voice was so quiet she could barely hear it herself. The knocking stopped. Then after a long pause, 3 quick taps answered her. Marigold's heart was beating so hard she could feel it in her teeth. She looked around again. Nothing. Nobody. Just the weeds bending in the wind and the distant hum of a truck passing on the highway. She should run. She knew she should run. She should find a grown-up. She should tell Ruth. But grown-ups never saw her. Not really. They looked right through her, the way you look through a window at something you don't want to notice. And if she told Ruth, Ruth might call the police, and the police might come, and they might find out she'd been living behind the diner, and they might take her somewhere, and Jessup had told her 100 times, 1,000 times, whatever you do, Goldie, don't let them take you. She looked at the trunk. She thought about her mother. What would her mother have done? Her mother had not been a perfect person. Marigold understood that even at 5. But her mother had once seen a stray dog limping beside the highway, and she had pulled the car over, and she had carried that dog 2 miles to a vet's office in her own arms. Marigold remembered the blood on her mother's coat. She remembered her mother's voice saying, "You don't walk past a thing that's hurting Goldie. You just don't." Marigold looked at this keyhole on the trunk. She didn't have a key. She looked around the car and saw it lying half hidden in the weeds near the back tire. A crowbar, rusted heavy. She didn't know how it had gotten there. She didn't stop to wonder. She picked it up with both hands. It was heavier than she expected. She almost dropped it. She had to carry it against her chest like a baby as she stepped back to the trunk. She wedged the flat end into the seam where the trunk met the body of the car. She pushed down. Nothing happened. She pushed harder, grunting, her face turning red. The metal groaned but didn't give. She repositioned the crowbar. She put her whole small weight on it. Her arms shook. A tear slipped down her cheek and she didn't know why. There was a sudden sharp crack and the trunk popped open half an inch. Marigold staggered back, dropping the crowbar. It hit the gravel with a clang that seemed impossibly loud. She stood frozen, breathing hard. The knocking had stopped. For a long moment, nothing moved. Marigold waited for somebody to come, for somebody to shout, for somebody to notice. Nobody did. Slowly, she stepped forward. She slipped her fingers under the edge of the trunk. She took a deep breath, and she lifted. The trunk lid rose heavy and stiff on its old hinges. Dust fell from it in a soft cloud. Sunlight poured into the dark space beneath. What Marigold saw made her whole body go still. A man. He was huge. Even curled up on his side in the cramped space, she could tell he was the biggest man she had ever seen. His shoulders filled the trunk like something that had been folded in there by force. He wore a black leather vest over a dirty t-shirt, and the vest had patches sewn onto it, patches with skulls and wings, and words she couldn't read. His arms were crossed behind his back, his wrists bound tight with silver tape. His beard was streaked with dried blood. One of his eyes was swollen almost shut. The other was open, looking straight at her. It was a brown eye, dark brown, like the color of a riverbed after rain. And when it saw her, something broke inside it. The man made a sound, not a word, something rougher, a kind of half sob that got trapped behind the duct tape across his mouth. His open eye filled with tears that spilled down his bruised cheek and into his beard. He didn't look away from her. He couldn't look away from her. She could see that. His whole body was trembling, and his one good eye kept filling, kept spilling, and he was making that broken sound. And Marigold stood there holding the trunk open with her small fingers, and she didn't understand what was happening, but she understood it was not about her. Or maybe it was. Maybe it was entirely about her. The man's lips moved behind the tape. She could almost see the shape of a word. It looked like Sarah. Marigold didn't move. She didn't run. She should have. Any other child would have. She watched this enormous broken man weep at the sight of her face, and something inside her, something old and small and quiet, leaned toward him. She had never seen anyone cry because of her before. She had seen people cry near her, her mother at the kitchen table late at night with the light off. Jessup once when he thought she was asleep. But never for her, never because of her. The man's good eye was fixed on her like she was the last thing he would ever see. She took a slow step closer. She reached into her pocket. Her fingers closed around Buttercup. She didn't take the horse out, she just held it. "It's okay," she whispered. She didn't know why she said it. It wasn't okay. Nothing about this was okay. But the words came out of her anyway in a voice so small, it was almost nothing. The man closed his eye. Fresh tears slid down. His whole body shuddered like something inside him had finally given up fighting. Marigold stood there in the white morning light, holding the trunk open, and looked at the man who looked at her like she was a ghost. She knew without knowing how she knew that her whole life had just changed. She didn't open her mouth for a long time. She just stood there. The heat rose off the gravel in soft waves. A fly landed on the edge of the trunk and lifted away again. Then the man made another sound, a small pleading sound. His lips moved behind the tape. She couldn't hear the word, but she could see it. Water. Marigold blinked. She nodded once. She didn't know why she nodded. She was 5 years old and there was a bleeding stranger bound in a car trunk, and every voice in her small world was telling her to run, and yet she nodded. She lowered the trunk lid carefully. Not all the way. She left it open a crack. The way her mother used to leave the bedroom door open a crack back when there had still been a mother and a bedroom. For air, so he could breathe. Then she turned and walked slow and quiet across the gravel lot. By the time the afternoon shadows stretched long, Marigold was back. She had a paper cup from the diner's trash rinsed twice in the creek. She had filled it at the outside spigot behind the building. She carried it in both hands the way a priest carries something holy. She walked so slow she barely walked at all. She checked the lot. Empty. She checked the diner windows. Nobody watching. She lifted the trunk lid with one hand. The man was awake. His eye was waiting for her. She knelt down beside the trunk and held the cup so he could see it. She understood without anyone telling her that she would have to remove the tape from his mouth. Her fingers were small and careful. She pinched the corner of the duct tape and pulled slowly the way you pull a bandage off a scraped knee. The man closed his eye. A low sound came out of him, not quite a groan. When the tape came free, his mouth was raw at the edges. His lips were cracked and white. She held the cup to his lips. Most of the water had already spilled on her walk over. Only an inch was left. He drank it in one slow swallow. When it was gone, his head fell back against the floor of the trunk, and he shut his eye, and he breathed out like a man who had been holding his breath for 3 days. "Thank you," he whispered. His voice was gravel. It was a voice that had been a voice for 50 years and was now barely a voice at all. Marigold didn't say anything. "My name is Silas," he said. She waited. "Some people call me Grizzly." She looked at him, his beard, his eye, the way his whole face seemed to soften when he looked at her, like all the danger had been drained out of him, and what was left was just a man. "Marigold," she said, quiet, her first word to him. He repeated it. "Marigold." The way he said it made her neck feel warm. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered. "You shouldn't see this." She didn't answer. She just watched him. He swallowed and she could see it hurt. "Marigold, listen to me. Those men, the men who did this, they're gonna come back." His good eye found hers. "You have to go. You have to forget you saw me, okay? You just walk away." She looked at him for a long time. Then she reached into her hoodie and pulled out the half biscuit she had saved from breakfast. She held it out to him. Silas stared at the biscuit, then at her face, then at the biscuit again. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. "You're hungry," Marigold said. It wasn't a question. He made that broken sound again, the one from behind the tape. His shoulders shook. His hands were still bound. He couldn't take the food. So Marigold broke off a small piece and held it to his mouth. He ate it. He chewed slowly. A single tear rolled down across the bruise on his cheek and disappeared into his beard. She fed him the biscuit piece by piece. When it was gone, she closed the trunk lid again, leaving the crack of air. "I'll come back," she whispered. And she did. She came back that night after the kitchen went dark. She brought half a sandwich from the dumpster and 2 more inches of water in a new paper cup. She also brought the small pocket knife she kept tucked in the inner lining of her hoodie, one she had found on the ground outside the gas station 3 months ago and kept without knowing exactly why. She showed it to Silas. Good girl, he whispered. You're a smart girl. She sawed at the tape around his wrists. It took her nearly 20 minutes. Her small fingers cramped. She kept at it. When the tape finally gave way and his arms came forward, he gasped like a man surfacing from deep water. His shoulders made sounds she had never heard from a human body. He flexed his fingers. Blood flowed back into them, and he winced, but he didn't complain. Thank you, he said. There were fresh tears in his eye. Thank you, Marigold. She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about asking. She almost didn't, but the question was too big to leave inside her. Why did you cry? She whispered. When you saw me. Silas's face changed. He looked away from her at the ceiling of the trunk. She could see him breathing, slow and careful like a man walking across ice. I had a little girl, he said finally. His voice was barely there. Her name was Sarah. She would have been about your age. Marigold thought about that. She's gone now, he said. Marigold nodded. She understood gone. You look like her, Silas whispered. I thought I was dreaming. I thought I was already dead and she had come to find me. Marigold reached into her pocket. She took out Buttercup. She set the small plastic horse on Silas's chest just above his heart. She can stay with you, Marigold said, so you're not alone. Silas closed his eye. His whole face collapsed. He didn't make a sound this time. He just wept silently while the little plastic horse rose and fell on his chest with his breathing. Marigold sat there beside him until the stars came out. She came back a second night, and a third. Each time she brought what she could carry. Water in a rinsed cup, food from the dumpster or the small trash can by the diner's back step. On the second night, she found a half-eaten biscuit, still warm from the kitchen, and a small carton of orange juice with the foil seal unbroken, and she felt the particular satisfaction of a person who has found exactly what was needed at exactly the right moment. On the third night, she brought a plastic bottle of water she had found near the gas station, still mostly full. She was halfway across the parking lot, the bottle tucked under her arm when she heard them. The rumble of engines, heavy, deep, not truck engines, motorcycles. She froze in the middle of the parking lot. 3 of them came up the frontage road and turned into the lot. They pulled into the far corner. They killed their engines. She could see the riders through the weeds under the yellow glow of the parking lot light. Men in black leather, men with patches. She couldn't read the patches from where she stood, but she saw one of them clearly. A white snake curled and hissing sewn onto a leather vest. She had seen that snake before. She had seen it 3 times in the last month on men who'd come to the back door of the diner late at night to meet her brother Jessup. The men by the motorcycles weren't walking toward the diner. They were walking toward the Cadillac. Marigold dropped the water bottle. It hit the gravel with a soft thud, and one of the men turned his head sharply at the sound. She didn't wait to see if he spotted her. She ran, low fast the way Jessup had taught her to run when something went wrong. She made it back to the crates and dove behind them and curled up on the dirt with her hands pressed flat over her mouth. She could hear their voices low and hard carrying on the night air. Pop the trunk. Keys are still in the ignition, Dutch said. Get it open. She heard the click of the trunk. She heard a long silence. And then she heard a voice she would remember for the rest of her life. He's gone. What do you mean gone? Trunk's empty, tape's cut, somebody let him out. Another long silence. Then a soft, almost gentle voice, a voice that sounded like a man smiling. Well, the voice said, ain't that interesting? The voice belonged to a man Marigold couldn't see, but she would learn his name soon enough. Dutch Reeves. Spread out, Dutch said. He can't have gone far. Man was half dead 3 days ago. Check the tree line, check the diner. Boots on gravel, moving in different directions, moving everywhere. Marigold held her breath. She pressed herself into the dirt behind the crates until she was sure her heart would stop from trying to be quiet. She could see a pair of boots pass not 6 feet from her hiding spot. She could smell the leather and the smoke and the sour metal smell of a gun holster. The boots stopped. The man turned. He was staring at the crates. Marigold closed her eyes, and then from the front of the diner, a door slammed. A woman's voice called out, bright and casual and very loud. Hey there, fellas. We're closed, but I got coffee on if you want some. You boys look like you've had a long night. It was Ruth. The boots near Marigold hesitated. Then they turned. They walked away toward the front of the building. Marigold opened her eyes. Ruth was standing on the diner's front porch, her arms crossed, her face lit by the yellow bug light above the door. She was not smiling. She was not afraid. She was looking at the men the way a farmer looks at a coyote that has come too close to the fence. The men gathered by their bikes, talking low. After a minute, they climbed on. The engines roared to life. They rolled out of the lot and onto the highway, and the sound of them faded slowly into the west. Ruth stood on the porch for a long time after they were gone. Then she turned her head very slowly and she looked directly at the stack of crates where Marigold was hiding. She didn't call out. She didn't come over. She just looked. Then she nodded once to herself and she went back inside the diner and closed the door. Marigold didn't move for a long time. When she finally crawled out from behind the crates, the parking lot was empty, and the Cadillac sat alone in the dark, and somewhere in the weeds or the trees or the shadows behind the shed, Silas was alive. She knew it. She could feel it. She went to the car. The trunk was still cracked open. She looked inside. Buttercup was still there, lying on the floor of the trunk where his chest had been. Marigold picked up her little horse. She held it to her cheek. It was warm. She carried Buttercup back to the crates. She curled up in her blanket. She did not sleep for a long time. She lay awake looking up at the black sky full of stars, and she thought about the men with the snake patches, and she thought about her brother Jessup's sad, tired face, and she thought about the word Sarah, and she thought about Silas, somewhere out there in the dark, hurt and hiding and hunted. And Marigold Whitaker, 5 years old, 3 feet tall, the girl nobody ever saw, made a quiet decision in the dark. She was not going to let them find him. She didn't know yet that her brother was in the middle of this. She didn't know yet that Ruth had a daughter in the ground because of men who wore that same snake. She didn't know yet that the man in the trunk had spent 20 years making choices that had cost him everything he ever loved, and that looking at her face had been the first moment in 15 years that he had wanted to live. She didn't know any of that yet, but the knowing was coming. It was coming the way weather comes slow and certain from across the mountains. And when it arrived, it was going to break a whole lot of things open. The morning after the motorcycles came, Marigold woke before the birds. She lay on her side behind the crates with her blanket pulled up to her chin and Buttercup pressed against her cheek, and she listened to the world coming awake. The highway was quiet at this hour. A single truck passed its headlights, sweeping across the Montana sky like a slow lighthouse beam. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked twice and then was silent. She thought about Silas. She thought about the sound his arms had made when they came free of the tape. She thought about the way he had wept when he first saw her face silent and helpless as a child. She thought about Buttercup rising and falling on his chest. She got up. The trunk of the Cadillac was empty. She had known it would be, but knowing and seeing were different things. The tape was still there, cut and discarded in the corner. The water cup was tipped over. Buttercup she had already retrieved. There was a small, dark stain on the carpet lining where his head had rested for too many days, and Marigold looked at it for a long time before she lowered the lid. She stood in the thin gray light of early morning and looked out at the tree line. He was somewhere out there, she was sure of it. Silas was too hurt to have walked far. He was hiding the way she hid, low and quiet and close to cover. And he was alone. She turned and went back to find him breakfast. The diner's morning rush gave her what she needed. A full biscuit, this time found in the small trash can by the back door before the cook had even thought to empty it. Half a container of orange juice, the kind that came in the little plastic bottle with the foil lid. A fistful of hash browns in a paper sleeve, still warm enough to feel through the fabric of her hoodie. She wrapped everything in a napkin and tucked it inside her shirt. Then she set off along the edge of the tree line. She moved the way she always moved, slow and sideways, never straight, never obvious. She checked windows. She checked doorways. She watched for the leather jackets, for the snake patches, for any shape that didn't belong. There was nothing. The lot was quiet. The highway hummed. Cedar Hollow was still mostly asleep. She had gone maybe 40 yards along the edge of the weeds when she saw it, a flattening in the tall grass just behind the thick trunk of a cottonwood, the kind of flattening a large thing makes when it lies down and stays very still for a very long time. She stopped. She looked at the space. She said nothing. A hand appeared from behind the cottonwood. It rose slowly, just a few inches palm out. She walked toward it. Silas was on his side in the grass, his back against the rough bark of the tree. He looked worse in daylight than he had in the dark. The bruises on his face had deepened overnight to a deep, ugly purple and green. His lip was split. The eye that had been swollen was still mostly closed, but the other one found her immediately, and the relief in it was so naked and unguarded that it made something ache inside her chest. "You came back," he said. His voice was barely a rasp. She knelt down beside him and pulled the food from her shirt. She unwrapped the napkin. She broke the biscuit in half and held one piece to him. He ate without protest, slowly, carefully. She poured the orange juice into the paper cup she had brought and held it to his lips. He drank. Some of the color came back into his face. "You shouldn't be out here in the open," he said between bites. "Neither should you," she said. He almost smiled. It pulled at his split lip, and he winced, but it was almost a smile. She fed him the hash browns piece by piece the way she had fed him the biscuit in the trunk, and he let her, and neither of them spoke for a while. The sun cleared the ridge and warm light fell through the cottonwood leaves and moved across the grass in soft patches. A meadowlark called from somewhere up the hillside. The highway murmured. "Those men last night," Silas said quietly. "Did they see you?" "No." "You're sure?" "I'm sure." She paused. "The lady from the diner came out. She talked to them. They left." Silas was quiet for a moment. "Ruth Bennett." Marigold looked at him. "You know her?" "I know of her. I know this diner." He shifted against the tree trunk and winced. "I know this stretch of highway. I know who works it." He paused. "Those men. The ones on the bikes. You've seen them before." It wasn't a question. She had told him in the trunk about the men with the snake patches. She had mentioned it the way children mention things casually, not understanding the weight. "They come to see my brother," she said. Silas went still. She looked down at the napkin in her hands, folding it into squares the way she always did when she needed something to do with her fingers. "Jessup, he's 17. He does things for them sometimes." "What kind of things?" "Deliveries." She folded the napkin again. "Small packages. He carries them in his backpack. He says it's just work." She looked up. "He says it's just until we get enough money for a better place." Silas looked at her for a long time. His jaw was tight. She could see the muscle working in his cheek. He was thinking something he wasn't saying. "How long has he been doing this?" he finally asked. "I don't know. A while, since after Mama died, I think." She put the folded napkin into her pocket. "He doesn't tell me much. He says I'm too young to worry about things." "He's right about that," Silas said quietly, but his voice said something different from his words. He looked away from her, then out across the field toward the highway. She watched his face. She was good at watching faces. She had learned to read what people felt underneath what they said, because people said one thing and felt another thing almost all the time. What she saw in Silas's face right now was something she had seen before in Jessup's face when he thought she was asleep. It was the look of a man trying very hard to figure a way out of something that had no good way out. "Silas," she said. He looked at her. "Are those men going to come back?" He was quiet for a moment. "Yes. For you. For me," he paused. "And now maybe to look for who helped me." She thought about that. She wasn't afraid exactly. Or maybe she was afraid in the way she was always afraid, a low background hum that she had learned to live inside like the sound of the highway. Always there. Never stopping. "Then we should move you," she said. Silas blinked. "Marigold." "There's a place behind the shed," she said. "On the other side. The door's broken and you can pull it almost closed from inside. I sleep there sometimes when it rains." She thought, "It's better than here, closer to the water spigot, closer to the trash." He stared at her. "You've got it all worked out." "I live here," she said simply. Something moved through his face that she couldn't quite name. "Okay," he said, "help me up." She stood and offered him her hand. He looked at it for a moment, this small hand with its bitten nails and scraped knuckles, and then he took it. She couldn't support his weight, and they both knew it, but she held on anyway while he pushed himself up the trunk of the cottonwood hand over hand until he was standing. He was massive. Standing, he blocked out the morning light. She barely came to his hip. His leather vest hung open, and beneath it, she could see the dark bruising along his rib cage. A whole half of his torso turned the color of a thundercloud. He swayed. She put her shoulder under his arm. "Okay," he said again through his teeth. "Let's go." They crossed the open ground between the tree line and the shed slowly, Marigold taking small, quick steps to match his shuffling ones. It took 4 times longer than it should have. She kept watching the windows of the diner, the road, the lot. Nobody came. Nobody looked. That was what it was to be invisible. Sometimes it saved you. The shed's broken door scraped inward with a push. Inside it was dim and smelled like old oil and rust and dry wood. Garden tools hung on hooks. A shelf of cracked clay pots. A folded tarp on the floor which Marigold pulled over for him to sit on. Silas lowered himself down with a slow exhale that sounded like a man setting down something very heavy. "Good," Marigold said. "Good," he agreed. He looked around. "You sleep here." "Sometimes." She gestured to the back corner. "There's a space behind those shelves. You can't see it from the door." He nodded. He leaned his head back against the wall and closed his eye. For a moment, she thought he might have fallen asleep, but then he spoke. "Marigold, I need to tell you something." She waited. "The men who did this to me." He opened his eye and looked at her. "They call themselves the Iron Serpents. They run drugs on this stretch of highway. They run them out of a motel about 2 miles east of here." He paused. "The man in charge is named Dutch Reeves. He is a very dangerous man. Not loud dangerous, quiet dangerous, the kind that smiles." She remembered the voice from the parking lot. Ain't that interesting? The voice that had sounded like a man smiling. "I know what he sounds like," she said. Silas's eye sharpened. "You've heard him. Last night in the parking lot." His jaw tightened. "He doesn't know who you are. He doesn't know you exist. That's the only thing keeping you safe right now, and I need you to understand that. If he finds out a little girl helped me out of that trunk, he will use that. He will use you to get to me, and he won't care how old you are." His voice was level, but she could hear something underneath it, something hot. "So you have to stay out of sight, more than usual. Can you do that?" "I'm already invisible," she said. He looked at her the way adults sometimes looked at her, with something between admiration and sorrow. "You shouldn't have to be," he said. She shrugged. She had learned not to spend too much time on the things she shouldn't have to be. She left him there with water and what was left of the hash browns and his back against the shed wall. She told him she would come back before dark. He told her to be careful. She already was. The day passed the way her days usually passed in the long, patient work of surviving. She collected cans. She watched the diner. She stayed off the main road and out of the sightlines of windows. She thought. She thought about Jessup. She had been trying not to think about what Silas had said about the iron serpents, about the snake patches, about what Jessup carried in his backpack. But the thoughts came anyway, the way cold comes through a thin blanket slowly from every direction at once. Jessup was 17 years old, and he was the only family she had left. He had been raising her in his way since their mother died. He brought food when he could. He made sure she was not completely alone. He was not good at it. She understood that. He was a boy himself, a scared and lost boy, doing the only thing he could think of in a world that had handed him nothing. She loved him. She had never stopped loving him, even when he disappeared for days at a time. Even when he came home smelling like cigarettes and something else, something chemical and sharp, she couldn't name. She loved him the way you love a cracked window, knowing the cold comes through, but not being able to imagine the view without it. But now she was thinking about him in a new way. She was thinking about his deliveries, his backpack, his late nights. She was thinking about the voice that had said, "Ain't that interesting?" She did not like where the thinking was going. Evening came. The dinner crowd at the diner thinned. Stars appeared above the ridge, coming out one by one like lights in the windows of a house you're walking toward. She was on her way back to the shed with a piece of cornbread wrapped in a napkin when she saw Jessup. He was coming from the direction of the highway, hands in his pockets, head down, walking fast the way he always walked when he did not want to be noticed. He was wearing his dark jacket, the one with the hood. He looked thin. He looked tired. He had the particular kind of tired that comes not from working hard, but from worrying hard, the kind that settles in behind the eyes and doesn't lift. Marigold stopped where she was in the shadow of the diner's back wall. Jessup didn't see her. He never did, not right away. She had always been better at hiding than he was at looking. He went around the side of the building to the smaller parking area where the staff parked. He pulled out his phone. She could see the screen glow against his face. He pressed a number and held the phone to his ear. She crept closer along the wall. She knew she shouldn't. She went anyway. And, "Yeah," Jessup said into the phone. His voice was low, tired. "I told you, I don't know who it was. I just know the trunk's empty." A pause. No, I haven't said anything to anyone. Come on." A longer pause. His free hand went to the back of his neck. She knew that gesture. She had watched him make it 100 times in 100 different moments of being afraid. "I understand. Wednesday. I know. Yeah." He looked out at the dark highway. "Just keep her out of it. Whatever you're planning, Dutch, she's not part of this. She doesn't know anything." Marigold's whole body went cold. She pressed her back flat against the diner wall and stopped breathing. "She's 5 years old," Jessup said into the phone. His voice had changed. There was something new in it, something raw. "She's 5 years old and she lives behind a diner and she doesn't know anything about anything. You leave her alone." A pause. His voice dropped even lower. "I will do what you need. I have been doing what you need, but Marigold stays out of it." He ended the call. He stood there for a moment with the phone in his hand staring at it. Then he pressed the heel of his hand against his eye hard, the way you press when you're trying to stop something from coming. He almost held it together. Almost. His shoulders broke first. One silent, shuddering heave that he caught before it became a sound. He breathed. He breathed again. He put the phone away. And then he turned and walked back toward the highway without ever knowing she had been there. Marigold stood against the diner wall for a very long time after he was gone. She thought about Dutch Reeves and his smiling voice. She thought about Jessup's shaking shoulders. She thought about the packages in the backpack, in the late nights, and the way Jessup always said, "You don't need to worry about things." Goldie always said it with such urgency, such desperation, as if worrying was the most dangerous thing she could do. She thought about what it meant that Dutch knew her name. Then she picked up the cornbread from where she had set it on the ground, and she went to the shed to find Silas. He was awake. She could tell from the way his eye moved to the door the moment she pulled it open. He had been watching the door for hours, probably alert the way hunted things are alert, never fully resting. She came in and sat down across from him and handed him the cornbread. He ate. She watched him. "Tell me about Dutch Reeves," she said. He paused mid-chew. "I told you. Tell me more." He studied her face. Whatever he saw there made him set the cornbread down. "What happened?" She told him. All of it. The phone call, Jessup's voice, the name Dutch had apparently already given her. She left nothing out. She sat cross-legged on the tarp with her hands folded in her lap, and she reported it the way she reported most things, quietly, without flinching, like she was describing something she had seen through a window, rather than something that had happened to her. When she finished, Silas was very still. "He knows about you," he said. It was not a question. "He knows my name," she said. "I think he's known for a while." Silas pressed his hand flat against the floor beside him. She could see the muscle along his jaw working. He breathed slowly, carefully around the pain in his ribs. He was thinking. "Your brother," he said carefully. "Jessup." "Yes. He went to Dutch tonight specifically to keep you protected." "I think so." Silas looked at her. "That boy loves you very much." I know, she said. He just loves me in a place he can't get out of. Silas was quiet for a moment. That's a very wise thing to say. She shrugged. I watch people. He leaned his head back against the shed wall. She could see him putting things together. She waited. She was good at waiting. Dutch Reeves doesn't leave loose ends, Silas said finally. He took me because I found out about his route. He planned to leave me in that trunk until I was nothing but a story nobody could prove. He's patient. He's careful. He paused. But he's also got a temper when things don't go his way. And right now, things aren't going his way. His cargo delivered itself and disappeared. Marigold thought about the smiling voice. He's coming back. Yes. Soon. Yes. She reached into her pocket and wrapped her fingers around Buttercup. We need a plan, she said. Silas looked at her, this enormous, battered man, looking at this tiny girl in the broken shed, and for a moment his face did something complicated and soft. Then it steadied. He nodded. We need Ruth, he said. The next morning, Marigold went into the diner for the first time. Not through the back door, through the front like a regular person. She pushed the glass door open and walked in and stood at the edge of the linoleum floor and looked around. It was after the breakfast rush. Only two old men nursing coffee at the counter and a woman in the corner booth reading a paperback. Ruth was behind the counter wiping glasses with a dish towel. Her eyes had a small security camera mounted in the corner above the coffee station, its little red light blinking steadily, the lens angled toward the back parking lot. Ruth saw Marigold immediately. Of course she did. She had always seen Marigold. Neither of them moved for a moment. Then Ruth set down the glass and the towel and walked to the end of the counter and folded her hands on top of it and waited. Marigold walked up to her. They looked at each other across the Formica. I need to talk to you, Marigold said. Ruth's face was still, but her eyes gray and sharp and deep as a mountain well moved across Marigold's face, the way a person moves across a room they have crossed many times before, taking inventory, making sure everything was still there. Sit down, sweetheart, Ruth said. Marigold sat on a stool. Ruth poured her a small glass of orange juice and set it in front of her without asking. She poured herself a cup of coffee and leaned on the counter and waited. Marigold wrapped both hands around the orange juice glass. She thought about what to say. She thought about how much to give away. She thought about Jessup. She thought about Silas in the shed. She thought about Dutch Reeves's voice. The men who came here the other night, she said. The ones with the snake patches. Ruth's face didn't change. Her grip on her coffee cup changed. I know who they are, Marigold said, and I know about the man they were looking for. Silence. The two old men at the counter murmured to each other. The paperback rustled. Do you, Ruth said. Her voice was very careful. His name is Silas. He's hurt, but he's alive. He's been hiding since they left. She paused. He needs help. Ruth set her coffee cup down. She looked at Marigold for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was very quiet, meant only for Marigold. I know who Silas Kowalski is, she said, and I know who Dutch Reeves is. I've known about Dutch Reeves for 15 years. She paused. I've been watching from that camera up there for months. I know you've been coming to my lot. I've seen you help the man in that trunk. Her jaw shifted. Something moved through her face like a storm moving through a valley, fast and dark and then gone. My daughter Hannah knew Dutch Reeves too, right up until the night one of his boys drove a pickup truck through a red light at 60 miles an hour and took her car off the road. The diner was very quiet. Marigold looked at Ruth. Ruth looked back at her. He was never charged, Ruth said. The boy was charged. Dutch walked away. Dutch always walks away. She picked up her coffee cup again. She turned it in her hands. I have been watching that man come and go from this stretch of highway for 15 years, and there has never been anything I could do about it. Not one single thing. She looked at Marigold. Until now, maybe, she said. Marigold felt something shift, like a door opening in a dark room. Silas says he'll give the police everything, Marigold said. Everything he knows. About Dutch, about the routes, about the deliveries. She paused. But he needs to know that when this is over, there's somewhere safe for me and Jessup. Ruth was very still. Jessup, she repeated. Your brother. He's in trouble, Marigold said. He didn't mean to be. He was just trying to take care of me. She looked down at the orange juice glass. He's not a bad person. He's just in a bad place. Ruth was quiet for a long time. Long enough that one of the old men at the counter asked for a refill, and she poured it without looking away from Marigold. Then she said, I have an extra bedroom. She said it the way you say something you have been thinking about for a long time. It's got good light in the morning. It faces east. Marigold looked up. It's been empty for 15 years, Ruth said. Her voice was steady. Her eyes were not quite. I think maybe it's been waiting. Marigold felt something in her chest that she had no word for. Warm and enormous and frightening. She looked away quickly down at the orange juice, because if she kept looking at Ruth's face, she was going to cry, and she had taught herself not to cry in front of people, even people who might understand. We need to move fast, Marigold said, before Dutch comes back. Ruth nodded. Tonight, she said, we do it tonight. But Dutch Reeves did not wait for tonight. He came back that same afternoon. Marigold saw them from across the highway, 3 SUVs and 2 bikes rolling slow along the frontage road. She was at the gas station collecting cans, and she saw them, and she felt the cold run through her like water through a crack. She ran. She ran across the lot and around the side of the diner and shoved through the back door. The shed was 30 yards away. She crossed that ground in seconds, her sneakers barely touching the gravel, and pulled the broken door open and stepped inside. Silas looked up from the floor. He read her face in an instant. They're here, he said. Now, she said. Right now. He was already moving, already pushing himself up the wall. Stay with me, he said. Don't run unless I say run. If I say run, you go to Ruth. You understand? You go straight to Ruth, and you don't stop. She nodded. Put your hand in mine, he said. She did. His hand was enormous around hers, rough and warm, and very steady for a man who had been in a trunk 4 days ago. Outside, the sound of engines died. Car doors opened. Boots on gravel. Marigold pressed herself against the shed wall beside Silas and listened. She heard Dutch's voice, that same smooth, smiling voice, the voice that was always at the exact temperature of something gone wrong. Spread out, check the shed. Check the whole back of the property. Marigold's stomach turned over. She looked around the shed quickly. The shelves, the clay pots, the hooks with the garden tools. Buttercup was in her pocket. She had checked that twice before she left the crates that morning. The horse was safe. The shed door rattled. Then from somewhere near the front of the diner, a sound split the afternoon air. Loud and sudden and impossible to ignore. The shriek of a smoke alarm, sharp and relentless, pouring out through the open kitchen window and across the back lot like something screaming. The boots outside the shed stopped. A voice called out, Dutch, fire alarm in the diner. A pause. Then Dutch's voice, still smooth, still almost amused. Check it out. The boots crunched away across the gravel. Marigold and Silas stood in the dark of the shed and did not move. She could feel his pulse in his hand, fast but steady, a controlled thing. Her own heart was going so hard she was sure they could hear it outside. She thought about Ruth, about the smoke alarm going off at exactly this moment, about the camera above the coffee station that had been watching the back lot for months, about the way Ruth had looked at her across the diner counter that morning, her gray eyes steady and knowing and deep as well water. Ruth had been ready. She had been ready for a long time. Now, Silas said, barely a breath. They moved. He pushed the shed door open with his shoulder, and they came out into the long light of late afternoon and crossed the narrow strip of ground to the diner's back door in a dozen fast steps. Silas was not fully healed. She could feel the effort in his grip, could see the whiteness around his mouth. But he moved. He moved because he had to. She pulled the back door, and then they slipped inside. The kitchen was hot and smelled of burnt toast. Ruth was standing at the stove with a dish towel in her hand and a blackened skillet on the burner beside her. She looked at them both without surprise. Walk in cooler, she said, jerking her head toward the back. Door on the left. There's a handle on the inside. Stay there until I come. The girl stays with you, Silas said. Ruth looked at Marigold. Marigold looked at Ruth. She stays with me, Ruth agreed. Silas released Marigold's hand. He looked down at her from his full height, this battered mountain of a man, and his face did something that had no name she knew. He touched the top of her head just once, very gently. Then he went through the door on the left. Ruth crossed to Marigold and put her hands on the girl's shoulders and knelt down so their faces were level. Her hands were strong and dry and very calm. I want you to stay behind the counter, Ruth said. Down low. Do you know how to stay low and quiet? Yes, Marigold said. Good girl. You go there now. Don't come out until I tell you. Marigold went. She slipped behind the long counter and crouched down between the refrigerator unit and the cabinet where Ruth kept the coffee filters. She pulled her knees to her chest. She put Buttercup in her lap. She waited. Through the service window, she could see the back lot. Two of the Iron Serpent's men were standing near the shed, looking at the open door. A third was coming around the side of the building. Dutch Reeves was standing in the middle of the lot with his arms crossed, looking at the diner with an expression that was not quite anger and not quite patience, but something between the two that was worse than either. He was tall, lean, silver-haired at the temples. He wore his leather vest over a dark shirt, and the white snake on his back caught the last of the afternoon light. He looked at the diner for a long time. Then he walked toward it. The front door opened. The bell above it rang small and ordinary, the same way it rang for every trucker and tourist and family that ever came through Cedar Hollow. Dutch Reeves stepped inside like he owned the floor he was standing on. Ruth was already behind the counter towel over her shoulder, hands folded on the formica, waiting. We're closed, she said. Her voice was the same voice she used for difficult customers and bad weather and every hard thing life had brought to her door. Level, dry, utterly without fear. Dutch smiled. It was a practice smile, the kind that had been put on and taken off so many times it had worn smooth like a river stone. He walked to the counter and sat down on a stool. I just need a minute of your time. You had your minute the other night, Ruth said. I believe I answered your questions. You did, Dutch agreed pleasantly. I'm just wondering if maybe you forgot to mention something. Ruth said nothing. Dutch looked around the diner, the booths, the windows, the service window into the kitchen. He was cataloging, filing. His eyes were the color of shallow water, pale and flat and not warm. We found something interesting, he said. He reached into his jacket pocket and set something on the counter. A child's drawing, done in pencil on a napkin. The shape of a horse unmistakable, even in the rough lines of a young hand. Marigold's breath caught. It was not Buttercup. It was a drawing she had made weeks ago and forgotten, tucked between the clay pots on the shed shelf when she was looking for a dry place to keep it. Belongs to a child, Dutch said. His voice was conversational. He turned the napkin over in his fingers. Found it in your shed. Now I know you don't have kids of your own, Ruth. I know that about you. So I have to wonder. He set the napkin down on the counter. Whose is this? Ruth looked at the drawing. She looked at Dutch. She did not look at the space behind the counter where Marigold was crouched 2 feet away. Kids from town play back there sometimes, Ruth said. I don't chase them off. Can't be everywhere at once. Dutch nodded slowly. The smile stayed exactly where it was, unmoved, like something painted on. You know what I think, he said. I think somebody has been living on your property. Somebody small, maybe somebody young. His pale eyes settled on Ruth's face. And I think that same somebody might have been very interested in a car we left in your lot. I don't know anything about a car, Ruth said. No. Dutch picked up the napkin drawing again. He held it between 2 fingers like it was evidence. You know what happens to people who get between me and my business, Ruth? I imagine something unpleasant, Ruth said. She did not move. But I've been running this diner for 31 years. People have been trying to threaten me out of one thing or another for most of them. So far, everyone who's tried has had worse luck than me. She held out her hand. Give me that. It doesn't belong to you. Dutch looked at her outstretched hand. Something shifted behind his pale eyes. He set the drawing in her palm. I'll be back, he said. I know you will, Ruth said. Next time, use the front door like everybody else. Dutch stood. He looked at the diner one more time, the long, measuring look of a man making plans. Then he walked out. The bell above the door rang again behind him. Ruth stood at the counter and did not move until the sound of the engines faded out of the lot and onto the highway. Then she walked to the end of the counter and looked down at Marigold. Marigold looked up. Ruth held out the napkin drawing. Marigold took it. She pressed it against her chest. Her hands were shaking, she realized. They had been shaking for a while. She hadn't noticed until now. Ruth crouched down on her heels, old knees creaking, and looked at the girl crouched against the cabinet. She reached out and tucked a strand of pale hair behind Marigold's ear. "You all right?" she asked. "Yes," Marigold said. Then, because she had promised herself to be honest when she could, "My hands are shaking." "Mine too," Ruth said. She held up her right hand and they both looked at it steady as a rock. She looked back at Marigold. A corner of her mouth moved at them. On the inside, Marigold felt something loosen in her chest, something tight and held that had been there for so long she had forgotten it was not supposed to be there. She heard the walk-in cooler door open and Silas's heavy footsteps crossed the kitchen floor. Ruth straightened up. She picked up the phone behind the counter and dialed. She waited 3 seconds. "Evening," she said into it. "This is Ruth Bennett at the Highway Diner on 980. I need to speak with whoever is handling the Iron Serpents case." "Yes, I'll hold." While she waited, she looked at Marigold and nodded once, slowly, like a promise being made without words. What followed happened faster than Marigold expected and slower than she needed. The deputies came first. 2 cars, no sirens, pulling into the lot from the frontage road with their lights off. The way Ruth had asked them to come, quietly, because Dutch Reeves had ears everywhere in this county and everybody knew it. Silas met them at the back door. He was calm. He had put his leather vest back on, patches and all, and he stood in the doorway of Ruth's diner and he told the deputy his full name and he said he wanted to make a statement. The deputy, a young man with a careful face, looked at Silas and then looked at Ruth standing behind him and then nodded and said, "Yes, sir. Let's do that." They sat at the corner booth, Silas and the deputy and a second officer who had a recorder. Ruth brought coffee. Marigold sat in the next booth over with her knees pulled up and listened. Silas talked for a long time. He talked about the Iron Serpents and their route along the E90 corridor. He talked about the distribution points, the motel 2 miles east, the storage unit off the frontage road, past the grain elevator. He gave them names, he gave them dates. He talked about Dutch Reeves with the careful, detailed accuracy of a man who had been inside this world for 20 years and had memorized it the way a soldier memorizes terrain. He did not minimize his own history. When the deputy asked about his affiliation with the Hells Angels, Silas answered plainly and fully. He said he had done things he was not proud of. He said he was prepared to answer for them. Then he said one more thing. He said, "There's a 17-year-old boy named Jessup Whitaker. He's been running deliveries for Dutch Reeves. He did it because Reeves threatened his little sister. He's a minor and he's scared and he is not the enemy here. I'm asking you to consider that when you talk to him." The deputy wrote it down. Marigold looked at the table in front of her. She put her finger on a small scratch in the formica and traced it back and forth. They found Dutch Reeves at the motel 2 miles east at 11 o'clock that night. They found 4 of his men with him and enough evidence in rooms 12 and 13 to put all of them away for a long time. Dutch did not go quietly. There was shouting and then there were more sirens. And then there was a long silence that settled over Cedar Hollow, like the first real silence the town had known in years. Marigold was sitting at Ruth's kitchen table when the deputy called to tell him. Ruth stood at the counter and listened and said very little. When she hung up, she turned to Marigold and said, "It's done." Marigold nodded. "Dutch is in custody," Ruth said. "Several others. They're looking for Jessup." Marigold's hands went still on the table. "He's not in trouble," Ruth said quickly. "They just need to talk to him." Marigold looked at the wall. Somewhere out in Cedar Hollow, Jessup was walking around with his hands in his pockets and his head down, carrying everything alone, the way he always had, not knowing that by morning the thing he had been afraid of for over a year would be gone. She hoped someone would be gentle when they told him. They found Jessup at 2 in the morning sitting on the steps of the trailer park off Miller Road, where he and Marigold officially lived, even though Marigold had not slept there in months. He had his phone in his hand and he was looking at it. The deputy told her later that when they drove up, he had looked at the approaching headlights with the kind of tired relief that comes to people who have been dreading something for so long that its arrival is almost a mercy. He did not run. He held up his hands. He said, "Is my sister okay?" That was the first thing he said. "Is my sister okay?" They told him she was. He put his face in his hands and stayed that way for a long time while the deputies waited. Marigold did not see any of this. She was asleep by then at Ruth's kitchen table with her head on her folded arms and Buttercup tucked under her cheek. Ruth had put a dish towel over her shoulders like a blanket and turned the light down low and let her sleep. When she woke up, the kitchen was full of mourning. She lay still for a moment listening, coffee percolating, birds outside the window, the sound of Ruth's footsteps moving around the kitchen, soft sounds, ordinary sounds. The sounds of a house that had a person in it who knew what they were doing. Silas was gone. She knew that without looking. He had told her the night before, while Ruth was still on the phone with the deputy, that he would go with them in the morning, that he had things to account for and he was ready to account for them. He had said it the way men say things they have decided and are not going to change their minds about. She had nodded. He had looked at her for a long time and then said, "You are the bravest person I have ever met. And I have met a lot of people." She had not known what to do with that, so she had looked at the floor. He had said, "Marigold, look at me." She had looked. "Whatever happens next," he had said, "you remember that you are the one who started all of this, not me, not Ruth, not the police, you, a 5-year-old girl with a crowbar and a plastic horse and a heart 3 times too big for her chest." He had paused. "Don't you ever let anyone tell you that you don't matter. You understand me." She had understood him. She sat up at Ruth's kitchen table now and pushed her hair out of her face. Ruth turned from the stove and looked at her. "Morning," Ruth said. "Morning," Marigold said. Ruth set a plate in front of her, pancakes, thick ones, golden brown with butter already melting into the top stack. Marigold looked at the pancakes. She looked at Ruth. "Maple syrup?" Ruth asked. "Please," Marigold said. Ruth set the syrup on the table and poured herself a cup of coffee and sat down across from Marigold, and they ate breakfast together in Ruth's kitchen in the morning light, and outside the window the cottonwood trees were moving in a soft wind, and the highway hummed in the distance, and Cedar Hollow was waking up on the other side of something. 3 weeks later, the social worker came. Her name was Carol Briggs, and she wore a gray blazer and drove a county sedan and had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She sat across from Ruth at the diner counter with a folder open between them and asked a series of questions that Ruth answered with the same levelness she brought to everything. Marigold sat in the corner booth and drew in a notebook Ruth had given her. She drew horses. She drew the mountains. She drew a shed with a broken door and a man with a beard sitting inside it and a small girl sitting across from him. At one point, Carol Briggs came over to the booth and sat down across from her. "Hi, Marigold," she said. "Hi," Marigold said. "Can I ask you something?" Marigold put her pencil down. "Okay." Carol Briggs leaned forward slightly. She had the particular careful posture of a person who has learned to take up less space so as not to frighten small things. "Is there someone you feel safe with? Someone you'd like to stay with going forward?" Marigold looked at Carol Briggs. She looked across the diner at Ruth, who was watching from behind the counter with her coffee cup in both hands and her face carefully neutral, not pushing, not hoping out loud, not making it harder than it needed to be. Marigold looked back at Carol Briggs. She pointed at Ruth. Carol Briggs wrote something in her folder. Ruth looked down at her coffee cup. Her shoulders moved just once with something that was not quite a breath. The paperwork took 3 weeks. In the meantime, Marigold slept in the east-facing room at Ruth's house, the room with good morning light that had been empty for 15 years. Ruth had put fresh sheets on the bed, white with small yellow flowers on them. She had put a lamp on the nightstand with a warm bulb that didn't hurt your eyes when you woke up in the dark. She had put nothing else in the room, understanding somehow that Marigold would need to fill it herself slowly on her own terms. On the 3rd night, Marigold had come downstairs at 2 in the morning and stood in the kitchen doorway. Ruth was sitting at the table with a cup of tea, not asleep, not surprised. Can't sleep, Ruth asked. I'm not used to a bed, Marigold said. Take a while, Ruth said. Come sit with me. Marigold had sat. Ruth had made her chamomile tea in a mug with a chip in the handle, which Ruth said was her favorite mug because chip things still work. They had sat in the kitchen in the middle of the night and not talked much, and it had been the most comfortable Marigold had felt in 2 years. After that, she started sleeping better. Jessup's situation resolved itself over the following weeks with the careful grinding slowness of legal proceedings. He was 17, a minor, and his lawyer appointed by the county was a woman who had a talent for making the circumstances around a bad decision visible. The circumstances around Jessup Whitaker's bad decisions were considerable, and the judge could see them clearly. During the proceedings, the deputies had told Jessup the full story of what had happened at the diner about Silas in the trunk and the iron serpents, and his sister's role in unraveling all of it. Jessup had reportedly sat in silence through the entire telling, and when it was over, he had pressed both hands flat on the table in front of him and said nothing for a long time. He was sentenced to 14 months in a juvenile rehabilitation program in Billings. Not prison, not nothing. 14 months with structure and counseling and a GED program, and at the end of it, a record that could be sealed when he turned 18 if he completed the terms. Marigold was not there when they told him the sentence, but Ruth was. Ruth had gone to the courthouse in her good coat and sat in the gallery and been there when it was over. She told Marigold that Jessup had looked at the floor when they read it and that his shoulders had gone loose with something that was not quite relief but was close to it. What Ruth did not tell Marigold, but what Marigold learned later, was that Jessup had turned in his seat after it was over and looked through the gallery until he found Ruth's face, and he had said 2 words without sound, just the shape of them on his mouth. Thank you, Ruth had nodded. She was good at nodding. She meant it every time. The first time Marigold visited Jessup in Billings, she wore the yellow dress Ruth had bought her at the shop in town. She sat across from him at a table in a visiting room that smelled like industrial cleaner and old carpet, and they looked at each other for a moment, the way people look at each other after something large and irreversible has happened between them. Jessup looked better. He had color in his face. His eyes were less hollow. He had been eating regular meals and sleeping in a real bed, and someone had apparently told him to get a haircut, which he had done, and it made him look younger and older at the same time. Hey, Goldie, he said. Hey, she said. He looked at her yellow dress, at the ribbon in her hair, at the way she sat in the chair, straight-backed, comfortable in her own body in a way she hadn't been before. He looked at all of it carefully, the way you look at something you almost lost. You look good, he said. His voice was thick. I feel okay, she said. He put his elbows on the table and leaned forward. Is she good to you, Ruth? Yes. She's not just going through the motions. Marigold thought about the chip mug, the chamomile tea, the east-facing window, the yellow dress, the way Ruth said good morning like she meant it every single time. She taught me to make pancakes, Marigold said. Jessup smiled. It was a real smile, which she had not seen from him in so long that it startled her. Yeah. The batter has to rest, Marigold said seriously. You can't rush it. Jessup laughed. Actually laughed short and surprised and real. Then the laugh faded and he looked at the table and his hands and back at her. I'm sorry, Goldie, he said quietly. I'm sorry about all of it. The deliveries, leaving you alone, all of it. I know, she said. I thought I was protecting you. I know that too, she said. You were. She paused, just from the wrong direction. He nodded slowly. He ran his hand through his new haircut. He looked away for a moment and then back. They told me about Silas, he said. What you did. What he did. She looked at him. They said he gave up everything to make sure you and me were looked after. Jessup's voice went quiet. He didn't have to do that. He chose to, Marigold said. Jessup was still for a moment. Because of you. She shook her head. He made his own choice. Because of you, Jessup said again gently, firmly, the way he used to be firm about things when they were smaller. She let it go. She reached into her pocket and took out Buttercup. She set the little horse on the table between them. Jessup looked at it. Keep her, Marigold said, until you come home. Jessup looked up from the horse. His eyes were bright. You sure, he said. She'll remind you, Marigold said. Of what? She thought about it. That somebody's waiting. Jessup picked up Buttercup with careful fingers. He turned the small horse over in his palm and looked at the worn paint on the mane and the small crack in the leg and the way one ear had chipped at the tip years ago, and his face held all the weight of everything they had both survived. I'll be back in 14 months, he said. I know, Marigold said. I'll be here. 3 months after the night Dutch Reeves was taken from the motel on the east side of Solder Hollow, the cottonwood trees along the creek began to turn. Their leaves went from green to a trembling yellow gold, and they shook in the September wind like small, bright fires. Marigold planted a rose bush in Ruth's backyard on a Saturday morning. Ruth had helped her pick it out at the garden center in town the day before, a bare root variety with canes that looked dead but were not. The man at the garden center had told Marigold that roses looked their worst right before they bloomed. She had filed that away. They dug the hole together, Marigold with a small trowel, and Ruth with the full-size one, working side by side in the cool morning air. The ground was still soft from a rain 2 days before. The digging went easily. When the hole was ready, Marigold set the rose bush in it and began to press the soil back around the roots. She worked carefully, making sure no roots were bent or crowded. Does it have a name? Ruth asked. Marigold pressed the last of the soil into place. She patted it smooth with her palm. She thought about a man in a trunk. She thought about tears on a bruised cheek. She thought about the shape of a word on cracked lips. Sarah, she said. Ruth was quiet beside her. The wind moved through the cottonwoods. That's a good name, Ruth said. The morning of the prison visit, Marigold woke up before Ruth and went downstairs and stood in the kitchen in her socks and looked out the window at the rose bush. It was late October now. The leaves had fallen, the canes were bare and brown and looked like nothing. But she knew what was inside them. She had read about it in the book Ruth had gotten her from the library, the one about growing things. She knew the plant was resting, pulling itself inward, storing everything it needed for the spring. She made herself a glass of orange juice and sat at the kitchen table with the drawing she had finished the night before. She had been working on it for a week. It showed 3 figures standing in a backyard. One tall woman in an apron, one small girl with pale tangled hair, and on the other side of the fence, a large man with a beard and kind eyes. He was not inside the fence, but he was close to it, and all 3 figures were turned toward each other, and in the middle ground between them was a rose bush heavy with flowers. She rolled the drawing carefully and put it in the cardboard tube Ruth had found for her. Ruth came downstairs at 7, and they ate breakfast and drove north in Ruth's sedan through the mountains where the aspens had gone gold, and the sky was the particular blue that only comes in October over Montana. The prison visiting room was familiar to Marigold now. This was her second time. She knew the sign-in process, the metal detector, the walk through the corridor with its fluorescent lights and linoleum floor. She had learned the name of the guard at the front desk. She always learned people's names. Silas came through the door looking better than he had the first time she visited. The bruising was long gone. He had put on some weight. His beard was trimmed. He wore the prison uniform the same way he had always worn his leather vest, as if clothing were just clothing and what mattered was underneath. He sat across from her and Ruth, and he smiled, and it was a full smile, the kind that reached all the way into his eyes and did not stop there. Hey, kiddo, he said. Hey, Marigold said. You look like you've been sleeping. I sleep in a real bed now, she said. It took some getting used to. He glanced at Ruth. How's the diner? Busy, Ruth said. Cedar Hollow discovered we do pie on Fridays. I've had to start making 4 kinds. What kind, he asked. Apple, peach, chocolate cream, and something Marigold invented that involves peanut butter and honey and technically does not have a name yet. Silas looked at Marigold. You invented a pie. It's more of a work in progress, Marigold said seriously. He laughed. That same laugh she had heard only twice before, short and surprised, coming from somewhere real. She reached across the table and unrolled the drawing from its tube. She laid it flat with her palms and held the edges down and let him look. He looked for a long time. She watched his face while he did. She watched the way his expression moved through things, through recognition, through something sharp and quick she knew was grief, through something else that was slower and wider and did not have a name she knew. She watched his jaw shift and his eye go bright and the long exhale he let out through his nose. He touched the edge of the paper. He touched the small figure with the pale hair. He touched the rose bush in the middle. "You named it Sarah," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," she said. He pressed his lips together. He looked at the drawing for another long moment. Then he looked at her. "Tell me about the rose bush," he said. So she told him. She told him about the bare root cutting that looked dead but wasn't. She told him about the soil and the rain and the October wind. She told him what she had read in the library book about how roses pulled inward in winter, gathering strength, storing everything they would need for spring. She told him the canes were brown now, but she knew what was inside them. She told him it would bloom in June. She told him she would take a photograph and send it to him because she had learned from the prison website that you could send photographs in letters, and Ruth had bought her a disposable camera for exactly this purpose. She told him all of this in her careful, precise way, looking at him steadily, the way she looked at everything she needed to understand, and he listened to every word the way people listen when they know they are receiving something worth receiving. When she finished, he said, "Marigold." She waited. "I have to tell you something," he said. "Something I want you to hear from me, not from someone else." She folded her hands on the table. She waited. "The things I did," he said, "before, in the Angels. I am going to be here for a while, not forever, but a while. And that's right, that's as it should be. I'm not asking you to feel sorry about that." "I don't," she said. "Good." He looked at the drawing. "But I want you to know why I went in. When I came to that police station, I want you to understand that it was not because I had no other choice. I had choices. Men like me, we always have choices, even when we tell ourselves we don't." He paused and his voice dropped, not with shame, but with something more careful than shame, something that had been thought about for a long time. "My daughter Sarah died because I chose wrong. She got sick one night, a fever that came on fast, and my wife called me. I was at a meeting with the Angels, and I let it go to voicemail. I told myself I would call back in an hour. I didn't call back for 3. He stopped. He breathed. Sarah was in the hospital before I even knew she was sick, and she was gone before I got there. A fever that could have been treated easily if someone had been there to drive her in time. The visiting room was very quiet around them. I spent 15 years telling myself there was nothing I could have done, Silas said. That's what anger does. It makes you a very convincing liar, especially to yourself. He looked at Marigold across the table. And then a 5-year-old girl opened a car trunk and looked at me like I was worth saving. And I couldn't lie anymore. Marigold looked at him steadily. "I went in," he said, "because you showed me that it is possible to choose right, even when you're scared, even when everything is against you." He touched the edge of the drawing one more time. A little girl with a crowbar and a plastic horse chose right. The least I could do was the same. Marigold was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "The rose bush looks dead right now, but it isn't." He understood her. She could see it in his face. "You should see it in June," she said. He smiled, full and real and reaching all the way to the back of his eyes. "I plan to," he said. Ruth drove home through the mountains in the late afternoon, the October light turning everything amber, the aspens flickering along the road like small flames. Marigold sat in the passenger seat and watched the landscape go by and held Buttercup in her lap, which Ruth had returned to her the morning after Jessup left for Billings, because she said the horse needed to be with Marigold until Jessup came back to receive her properly. She would give it back to him in 14 months. She had already decided. Outside the window, the mountains moved past in their patient way, enormous and indifferent and beautiful. The sky above them was going from blue to a deep, clear violet, the color of the last hour of a good day. Ruth reached over and turned on the radio. An old song filled the car, something with a guitar and a voice that knew what it was talking about. Ruth hummed along very quietly, not quite singing. Marigold looked out at the mountains and thought about the rose bush in the backyard, resting inside its brown canes holding everything it would need for the spring. She thought about Jessup in Billings with Buttercup on his nightstand. She thought about Silas in his cell with her drawing, maybe unrolling it again in the evening light, and looking at the figure of the man standing close to the fence. She thought about her mother. She thought about the paper napkin ribbon on a birthday morning, and the weight of a small plastic horse in a small hand, and the way her mother had said, "You don't walk past a thing that's hurting Goldie. You just don't." She had not walked past it. She was 5 years old and 3 feet tall, and she had carried a crowbar in her arms like a baby, and she had opened a trunk in the heat of a Montana morning, and what came out of it had changed everything. What came out of it was still changing things, would keep changing things for a long time. The road curved through the aspens, and Cedar Hollow appeared below them in the early evening, its lights coming on one by one as the dark settled in. The diner sign was lit. Ruth's house sat at the edge of town with its east-facing window and its kitchen light already on warm and yellow in the blue dusk. Marigold pressed her palm flat against the cool car window. She watched the town come toward her, the way you watch a place that is yours come toward you. Slowly, certainly, like something that had always been waiting. Ruth pulled into the driveway and turned off the engine. She sat for a moment with her hands on the wheel looking at the house. "You hungry?" she said. "Yes," Marigold said. "Good," Ruth said. "I was thinking soup." They got out of the car in the cool October evening and walked together up the path to the front door. The cottonwoods along the back fence were bare now, their bones showing against the darkening sky. The rose bush stood in its corner of the yard, still and quiet, saving itself. Marigold stopped at the door. She looked back at the rose bush for a moment in the last of the light. Then she looked up at the sky, at the first stars coming through at the one steady point of light in the north that never moved, while all the others turned around it. Then she went inside. The door closed behind her. Warm light, the smell of a kitchen, the sound of Ruth filling a pot at the sink. Outside, the stars came out one by one over Cedar Hollow, and the rose bush stood in the dark and waited for June.